Alright guys, fun topic today. I am asking the question, are vegetarians weaker than their meat eating equivalents? Now if all else was the same, would we be weaker? Now if you had been a vegetarian your entire life, would your body adapt? Would you figure it out? Would you still be able to be as strong? Would you still be able to be as fast? How would that affect your health? How would that affect your physical appearance? How would it affect how youthful you look? Well, I'm in a very unique position where I have been a vegetarian nearly my entire life. Not my entire life, but since 1986. I know some of you are extremely flabbergasted that I am in fact older than that, but I am. I was born in 1980 and I made the decision to become a vegetarian when I was about 6 or 7 years old. You ask, oh, why was that? Was it because you like the animals? Were you strongly morally minded? Was it a cruelty thing? No, none of that. I was 7, I didn't care about any of that. I was just an awkward eater, a fussy eater. Now, in 1986, if your parents gave you something, they expected you to eat it. I come from, a hard-working, working-class family. When food was put in front of your plate, you expected to eat it. I, quite early on, started to mess the food around, specifically the meat bits. I would push them around the plate, I would chew them up, spit them out, I would scrape them into the bin, and over the course of a few years my parents got sick and tired of this. Basically I was throwing money down the drain in their eyes, rather than sort of persist and try and force me to eat meat, and so they just said, fine, don't eat meat, give it that one, thinking maybe it was a phase, I would pop out the other side at some point. Well, I'm 43 now, and I completely appreciate what they were going through, because my daughter is 7 years old and she's a very fussy eater too. Not in exactly the same way. She eats meat. I don't force that in anyone else in my house. And my parents and my brother and sister, they all ate meat as well. So it's only me, and I've never been the sort to force that on anyone. A little bit, you generally find within the sort of community of vegetarians and vegans that there are the sort of more militant ones, the ones that push it on you, that make you feel bad about the choices you make for yourself. I'm not like that. However, I can still talk about my experiences as me, my food, and later on in life, my training. And there has been this for quite a long time, this link between like not eating meat and manliness. Okay, there's many times in my life where it's been intimated that I'm less of a man or less strong or lesser in general because I choose not to eat meat. Every barbecue I've ever been to, I think someone somewhere makes some sort of reference to me being lesser than them because they're meat eaters. So I am what's known as a Lacto Ovo Vegetarian. There are in fact 7 different types of vegetarian. My type, the Lacto Ovo, means I can eat eggs and dairy. There are then the vegans, the ones that do not have any animal derivatives in anything they consume, wear or own. And then there are the pescatarians, the ones that eat fishes as well. Then there are the ones that have popped up just lately, sort of faddy types, almost seemingly made up completely, the poly-vegetarian and the flexi-vegetarian. Now these guys just flip-flop. They eat whatever they want when they want. They call themselves a vegetarian some days and not other days. Weirdos. Anyway, so when people ask me, oh, what type of vegetarian are you? The easiest way to describe it is no food with a face.
Do you want some chicken? No food with a face.
So let's just rewind all the way back to 1986. I'd kind of gone off meat one animal at a time until the only 2 things that were allowed on my plate from an animal were fish fingers and very crispy bacon. The reason why I didn't really like it, I didn't like the taste of meat, I didn't like the texture, I didn't like the sensation, and I certainly didn't like the idea of what I was eating. So that's kind of the motive. And it just led me to, I just didn't want the food I was being given. And just like that, age 7 maybe, I had my this is me moment. And I came out as a full-fledged vegetarian. This is me. And then I went to primary school, and met a fresh set of challenges there. In 1986, 7, 8, 9, whatever, all of that time, the schools were a very different place. It was like a good 3 decades before Jamie Oliver came along and sorted school dinners out.
What on earth is that?
I think it's a fish or a chicken foot.
It was hell. School dinners were shit in 1986, 7, 8, 9. It was like prison food. And the dinner ladies were like the screws at a prison. They would just march around the dinner hall making sure the kids ate their dinner. Now, in 1986, they hadn't really had much exposure to vegetarianism. In fact, the only vegetarians that a school in the 80s would have seen, really, would have come from a minority that has a religious dietary requirement. And you often find that sort of in Hindu kids, and there was in 1986 there was maybe 2 in each class, so there were vegetarians present, and they were completely accommodated for, because vegetarianism and religion, no one wants to get in the way of that. However, in a predominantly white school, when a generic white kid walks up and says, "I don't want any meat, thank you very much," they say, "Oh, yes you are, because you've got no reason to not." And this came up every single day at dinner break. I would worry about it every single day, worrying about what meat was about to be presented to me. And some days I was able to sidestep it, but for the most part I would get a dollop of whatever it was that day. It was always shit. And I'd go down to my table and I'd eat everything else, and I'd just leave the meat. And I was made to sit there all dinner break while all the other kids had gone out to play, because I was deemed as the awkward child that wouldn't eat his dinner. Now this went on for a little while, quite a long time. In fact, I just sort of suppressed it. I just sort of got on with life. But I was missing dinner breaks. I wasn't allowed to play with my friends. I was being persecuted, and it was horrible. And one day, a very young version of me walked home from school, and I just cried. I just cried and cried and cried. I walked through the front door, I was crying, and my mum saw me upset. And it even makes me a little bit emotional now thinking about it. That must have been horrible for her to see her son so upset about something as stupid as food. And the very next day, she, with me in hand, pulled me all the way to school. She frog marched me into reception and demanded to see the head teacher. She sat me down outside his office, wanged the door open, went inside, and all I could hear was my mum tearing strips off him for the best part of half an hour. And when she came out, she went, "Right, we're having packed lunches from now on." And that was that, it was settled. And I was completely over the moon, because my mum was only ever going to pack me the food that she knew that I would eat. When I moved up to big school, secondary school, things changed a little bit. The cafeteria was a little bit more, you get to pick what you want. I guess that's sort of teaching kids independence and all of that. So I think I started off with packed lunches, but ended up going to school dinners because you could pick and choose what you wanted. They gave you that choice, and that was great. However, as I got older, the other kids realised that I would choosing different things to them, and they knew any kind of difference at school causes one potential problem. Yeah, bullying. Yeah, they came after me, and it wasn't vicious at first. It was literally just snarky comments. Again, at the very tip of that, intimating that it's less manly to not eat meat. And so I went on like that for a while. It's just, you just take these little snipes as they come, and in the end, it was a bit like water off a duck's back. So that sort of brings me up into my teenage years. Now, as I got into the teenage years, I was still a small child. I was like, when I was 10, 11, 12, I was still a very little child. As all the way up through school, I was the little kid. I'm quite young for my year, but in addition, I was never getting the protein that other kids were. I wasn't getting my meat. I was eating all this other stuff, but it was quite clear, and looking back on it, the reason I was small, the reason I didn't have the growth spurts when I probably should have, is because my body was lacking in huge amounts of protein. I was kind of the small kid. I was on the front row of every school photo. Now, if you'd asked me if being a vegetarian makes you weak while I was at school, I would have said yes, absolutely. Little kid, skinny kid, all the other kids growing faster than me, it's not fair. Roughly that time, in sort of 92, new products started to appear on the shelves in supermarkets, namely Linda McCartney and Quorn in the UK. These are meat alternatives. At first, they only had a couple of items each in each of the brands. I think veggie burgers were first and sausages were second, something like that. And suddenly, it meant that there was a vegetarian alternative to what my family was eating. Say if they were having beef burgers, I would just get a Quorn burger, and everything else would be the same. It made life simpler. It made life easier to cook for. And over the next few years, more and more products came available, including mince and chicken pieces and fillets and pies and lasagnas, and it just boomed, right? Both of these businesses, McCartney and Quorn, they both boomed. And I suddenly felt like I had food, proper food. And that led to an inevitable change in me. I went through a growth spurt. I was sort of 13 years old, I just went boom, 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 boom. And that is directly related to this sudden ingestion of all of this protein that I wasn't getting before. And before I knew it, I was 6 foot tall and, you know, a teenager. And it meant that suddenly, no matter what my mum and dad cooked for me at home, they could just cook me this one little thing extra and just plonk it on the side of my plate. And I know that a lot of people, a lot of vegetarians, a lot of vegans, they don't like the idea of meat substitutes. Why would you have meat substitutes? For the very simplistic reason, when you're cooking for a family, that you can just cook one meal and you just swap out the meat bit for a non-meat bit. That's why. So now I'm a teenager and I'm starting to think about life a little differently. The end of school is in sight. I'm starting to look at girls a little bit differently and play with my Lego a lot less. So what was one of the things that stood out from that sort of period? Well, going to the gym. It was my very first taste at about 16 going to a gym. It was called the Engine Room. It was the only one in the village. It's still open today, in fact. And I went down once a week on a Friday with a few friends, and I'd bumble around this sort of gym. It was only a little gym. I'd bumble around it. I'd have a go on a few things. I'd go on the treadmill, this, that, the other, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I obviously didn't make any gains, but it got me into the mindset early that I need to look after myself. So a big chain gym opened up not far from where I lived, and I went with my friend and we started to train there. Over the next few years we trained predominantly weight training, so inevitably we weren't aiming to be bodybuilders, we just wanted a bit more muscle to attract the girls. Simple thing, right? That's a lot of motivation for young men. That's kind of why they go to the gym, is to get chicks, and that's just the truth of life. Very few are thinking about long-term health benefits or long-term health consequences at that point. It's very much just mass, 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 gains, gains, gains. Yeah, bro. And that's kind of where it's kind of that box where the gym bro lives. Okay, you know, I sort of passed through that. I didn't feel the need to go on Instagram or anything like that, basically because it hadn't been invented then. But yeah, so in the early 2000s, there we are in this big gym which is now Nuffield Health. And we did like sort of bodybuilding stuff, and it did mean that our bodies started to change. We got more muscle mass quite quickly over that time, and you don't have to be in that sort of environment for very long before you start looking for ways to sort of enhance that. So supplementation was the obvious choice, so we looked at protein and creatine for the first time, and we just started to take that exactly as it prescribed on the pack. You know, we worked out how much we needed, and we just took it 2-3 times a day, whatever, and that meant that we would get additional gains. And well, gains, muscle mass is what we're after, and that did happen. Even as a vegetarian with a relatively low protein diet, as I was able to top it up enough with the protein shakes that I did in fact gain this additional muscle mass, and I got to about maybe just shy of 90 kilos at a sort of a 6 foot height, and I looked all right, you know, and it was never more obvious than when I went on holiday, like with my friends and stuff. Obviously I was training and those guys weren't, and I would just have more build and physique about me than they would. So me and my friend, we got a little bit tired of going to this gym after a while, because it was a very corporately run gym, and it got oversubscribed quick. It had poor gym etiquette, weights being left out. It was hard to get on benches and things like that because people were just sitting on them. So we started to look for something else. We wanted a change. We wanted something different. We wanted to spice it up a little bit. And I got wind that there was a new gym just down the road opened, and it was described to me as a dirty floor gym. I didn't really know what that meant at the time, other than it was like manly. And I was like attracted to the idea of being a manly man, since I'd been sort of told for a lot of my life up until that point that I wasn't very manly because of what I was eating. So I went down to have a look. I opened the door and there's two ginormous dudes just sat behind a little tiny desk, almost like just waiting for me to arrive. And I said, hello, can I have a look around your gym, please? And they were the nicest guys. One of their arms probably weighed as much as I did. They were strong men, as in they trained strong men. And if you ever looked at a typical strongman shape, they're very wide, very deep. And so they showed me around the place, and it wasn't great, but it had a row of boxing bags, a boxing ring, a load of space, a little runway where you could run up and down things. It had logs, atlas stones. It had a little sort of a weighted area where like they had the machines, the basic machines and stuff like that. But what attracted me to it was the space. This was long before sort of CrossFit popped up, or any of these sort of warehouse style gyms that pop up in industrial estates. This was like the first one. And I was drawn to the fact that I could set up my own workouts and lay out my own weights and figure out my own sessions. And I was drawn to that style. So that's what I did. I went down, and although I didn't quite figure it all out at first, I was soaking in the other people that were training around me. I didn't realize it at the time, but there was one day there'd be some strongmen down there. Some day there'd be like a gymnast down there, and another day there'd be a kung fu guy, and like, oh my god, I'm suddenly being inspired by all of these guys. And before long I saw someone deadlifting like on a proper platform, proper form, and they were doing these bloody deadlifts, and I thought, yeah, let's have a go at that. And so suddenly introduced deadlifts into my routine, and that linked me to sort of the other disciplines. That linked me to the axle bar, that linked me to the Conan wheel, the yoke, the farmer's carry, the atlas stones, log press, car deadlift, tire flipping. It was suddenly world's strongest man was in my gym. So I was suddenly sucked into this world of strongman training. And over the coming years, all I did, every session was those kind of activities, and it created the strongest version of me I have ever been, and probably will ever be. It creates such a force. Now, to put it into perspective, the sorts of weights I was lifting, it was somewhere in the realms of about 260 straight conventional deadlift and 300k trap bar deadlift. I think I lifted about 300k car deadlift. I had two guys on top. I think I had over 300k yoke for a while. At 110k log press. I think I went close to 200k on a squat. So I can't even fathom these weights these days at the age I am now. Bearing in mind I was about 30 at that point where I took up that training. So I wasn't a young man, I was already into my 30s. But I was so taken by it that the gains and the strength just went straight up. And it's at this point, if you'd have asked me, does being a vegetarian make you weak? I'd have laughed in your face and carried your car away in my hands. It was that kind of strength. And I very much enjoyed those years of my life. And you have to sort of know when to sort of step away from it, because strongman training is extremely tough on your body. And if you stick with it for too long, you do serious damage to one part of your body or another. It's inevitable. Okay, so after strongman, I'd made the decision to sort of walk away from it, but that left me with sort of physical changes to my body. I was bigger. I weighed the best part of 95 kilos. I didn't look particularly good for it. I looked overweight generally. So I made the decision to do the only sport that I knew that could address that, which is running. I wasn't much into cycling or swimming. Running was very accessible. It didn't cost a lot. So I joined a running club and I took up running 3 times a week. And the longer I did it, the more weight I lost, the faster I got. And it got a little bit addictive. And I took part in loads of road running league races, half marathons and park runs, things of that ilk. And I managed to get my times right down. Over the course of a few years, I got my times right down. And in the end, I ended up doing sort of a park run at 17:52, a 10K in 39 minutes, and a half marathon in about 91 minutes. All really quite good times. So when I think back to the sort of 3 big phases of my life, the first being sort of the weight training, and then second, sort of the strongman and the running, I've done quite well in each of those, but it still didn't satisfy that gym training component that I needed. I wanted something else to train for, to get my shape back in my body. I still wanted that muscle mass a little bit. So at that point I saw an ad for Hyrox events. If you've not seen Hyrox events, they're a multi-discipline race. So you've got exercises with running mixed together as fast as you can, and it has strength and endurance components. And I took part in one a few years ago and I really enjoyed myself. And then I started to train harder for it, and it added this real sharp focus in the gym for me. And I got my physical self better than I had ever been when I was bodybuilding, when I was training strongman, when I was running. My physique became better than it was in my 20s and my 30s, and in my mid-40s, that's when my physique was the best it had ever been. I don't want to go any further without sort of touching on the sort of wider health benefits of being a vegetarian. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not interested in pushing my opinion on anyone. I'll leave that to the militant vegans, but I did want to touch on just a couple of things. Now, you don't have to look far on the internet or the NHS pages or a variety of other sort of medical journals to find out that there are many benefits to being a vegetarian. But the ones that stand off the page to me are the life-ending ones, the reduced chances of contracting the following: morbid obesity, big one. Yeah, as a vegetarian you eat much less saturated fats, so you're much less likely to get into that position in the first place. Number 2, coronary heart disease. Heart disease is a massive killer in the world. It polishes off so many men sort of my age and in their 50s long before they should die. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, another massive one. High blood pressure, quite a common one. It's much higher in sort of meat-eating diets. And cancers, specifically ones around the digestive tract and the colon, for example. You eat a lot of red meat, the chances of getting bowel cancer are massively increased. So there's just lots of little things like that. In addition to sort of the medical stuff, I've gone through life sort of always looking younger than I am. When I met my wife, who was 12 years my junior, she couldn't believe I was already 30. Okay, to conclude, I think the question that I asked at the beginning is, does being a vegetarian make you weak or weaker than a meat eater? Now, I think the answer is no. I think I've established that I can be plenty fast enough, plenty strong enough, plenty big enough eating a vegetarian diet. The question is, are they exactly equal? It's very hard to quantify. If I had exactly the same grams of protein a day than I would get in a meat diet, which one would win? Or would they just be the same? Is it irrelevant where the protein comes from? I personally believe it is. I've managed to lift a lot of weight, run a lot of distance, and run really quickly, and do lots of other really cool sporting things on a vegetarian diet. I've also got myself into fantastic shape. I'm not a pasty, pale, skinny vegetarian as sort of the stereotype that pops into your head. So yeah, I think the conclusion is, as long as you get the right amount in you to support your body and to support your training, then everything else is equal, then you're on just as level a playing field. The only advantages on this side, on the vegetarian side, would be the reduction of getting some of those more serious illnesses. It has never been easier to be a vegetarian or a vegan than it is right now here in 2023. I obviously have the benefit of remembering how bad it was in the 80s and 90s. It just makes me probably appreciate it just that little bit more, just how good we've got it today. Now, I just want to give a little wave to any of my vegetarian friends out there. I don't really have vegetarian friends, so if you're a vegetarian, stick me a comment down below. If there's anyone out there that's been a vegetarian as long as me or longer, yeah, stick a message in the comments. I'd be interested, because I've always felt a bit like an island on my own with this sort of dietary requirement. So please, yeah, just say hi, and maybe even a little wave to some of the vegans out there. Hello, vegans. Obviously, I eat things that vegans won't, but I think we have some things in common. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching this. This has been a really personal video for me, because I've touched on some sort of old memories of olden days, but I think it's raised a few points, and it was a good thing to sort of get off my chest. It's something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while since having this channel. Thank you very much for watching. Please give the channel a subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Mart out.